the broader meaning, the broader perspective is really significant for what's happening here. So Lord, open our eyes, allow us to see what it is that you want us to see. And in all that we do here, be honored and glorified. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so we're going to continue now in Matthew, and we're actually going to get to the 15th chapter. And as long as no one interrupts me, we should be able to get through the whole chapter. I'm going to try to pick that up. Of course, we'll believe that when we see it, won't we? We're looking at a familiar passage now. Actually, there's several things that are happening in this chapter that we're all familiar with. We've heard the stories, we've read the lessons, we've heard the sermons. But oftentimes, as we said, as we've been really journeying through the whole of Matthew's gospel, that there's a whole another side to this thing that sadly, oftentimes for no reason at all, we just seem to overlook it. It's not intentional. It just happens. But what we're going to see in Matthew chapter 15 is what we saw, and is very similar to what we saw in Matthew chapter 8. There's going to be a sequence of events that are going to happen with the religious, and then there's going to be sort of a point that comes in there. There's going to be a non-Jew, a Gentile that's going to enter the picture. And both, like in chapter 8, with the lady here in chapter 15, Jesus is going to say that it's great faith in these people who were not Jews that is unlike what he was hearing from the Jews. And then there's going to be this idea and then going into this land that's on the other side of the Sea of Galilee for them in the region that they would call the Decapolis. We'll be defining that here in just a few minutes, so hold on. And but it's the same thing that happened in chapter 8, and it's going to happen once again here in chapter 15. And all of the things are sort of connected that are happening here. We're going to see another feeding here this morning with the bread and the fish, like we saw a couple of weeks ago in chapter 14. This one, though, is going to be very different circumstances in a completely different place with a completely different group of people with a completely different result. And these things are really important for us to understand. So when we come to the 15th chapter now, and we start here in verse 1, then the scribes and the Pharisees who were from Jerusalem came to Jesus saying. So the first thing that you pick up in chapter 15 is something has changed in the first verse of the 15th chapter. Now we know all along we've been seeing this increase in the conflict between Jesus and the religious of his day, but it has gotten to a point now in his ministry to where sort of the big guns in Jerusalem, as it were, this is where the big guys were, your college professors, those guys that are supposed to know more than the rest of us. But anyway, that's who they were. And so for the first time, they're entering the picture. Up to this point, it has been just the sort of the local yokels, and I'm not trying to make fun of them. I'm just saying they're from the surrounding areas. The rabbis, the synagogue leaders, the scribes, they're all from the populated areas. And though their role is very significant, it doesn't carry the weight of Jerusalem. It would be like, and Chuck Smith showed up. Right? You get the idea. So it's from the big guys. That's what's happening here. So what's happening in the ministry of the Lord Jesus as he relates to the people of his day is that there's something here that's taking place that is abnormal. And it has worked all the way up to the top to get to Jerusalem now. And they say, look, we can't let this go anymore. We've got to send, the cream of the crop, as it were, the instructors. We've got them down to find out what's going on. So that's what's happening here. This is in response to Jesus and his growing popularity with the people, because Jesus is anything but religious. He's a complete opposite. He is not concerned about religion, tradition, ceremony, or any of the stuff that goes with it. He's interested in people. So Jesus is not religious in any way, shape, or form. He is relational. And so this has sort of begun to rock the boat a little bit, and so they've got to find out. So that's the significance of chapter 15, that even that first word, then. So this is telling us that because of all the stuff that happened before, there's going to be a response to this. Now notice carefully what the response from the big guns are. Okay? They're not questioning his teaching on Torah. They're not questioning even many of the miracles, even though they tried to downgrade him and say, oh, he's doing this with a power that doesn't belong to him. All of that. But this is not the problem, because they can't nail him down on going against Torah, against the instructions of God, what we call the law. And we now know, I hope, they're not law, they're instructions, they're teachings. He has not violated any of those in any way, so they cannot trap him in this. Because he said, I didn't come to set it aside, remember? I came to explain it. So we read fulfill, but it literally means I'm going to explain it. Now notice their response to what's happening. Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread. Now this right off the bat tells us the mindset of these guys that have now shown up. Again, their problem is not with Jesus and Torah. Their problem is with Jesus and their traditions. Did you see this? Why do, notice, your disciples, the ones that follow you, your Talmudim, your taught ones, why do they transgress what? The traditions of the elders. This isn't Torah. They can't nail him on Torah, but they're going to nail him on traditions. In other words, you're doing something that the rest of us don't do, and we don't like it, because you're stepping outside the bounds of what we all know is sort of the established rule of the day, the tradition of the elders. Why do your guys not pay any attention to this? Well, we all know why, don't we? Because you don't either, right? There's a major conflict and debate that has been rising, and we've seen this increasing conflict throughout Matthew's gospel, and it's only going to get worse from this point on. But the problem is that he's not stepping in line with everybody who, quote unquote, as an elder, has gone before him. That's the problem. Now, this is interesting because look at what the tradition is. They don't wash their hands when they eat bread. Okay? Now, folks, it's probably a good idea to wash your hands before you eat, especially in our day, right? That's why hand sanitizer's all over the place. Can't find it in the stores anymore, along with TP. We'll be talking about that here in a minute. But anyway, you get the idea. But this is the problem. The elder said you've got to wash your hands. But notice they're very careful here to not say that it's Torah, because it isn't. You cannot find in Torah where God gives the instruction or the teaching that you have to wash your hands before you eat bread. Why would God have to instruct that when it's common sense? Okay? Especially if you came out of the latrine. Now, I'm telling you, we're going to see that Jesus is going to use that very word. You don't say it in your English, but that's exactly what he's talking about. It's just common sense. But they're not equating it with the Torah. They do not wash their hands when they eat their bread. So you can see even today that there is this elaborate, and you can go in and search all of this stuff out. It's really quite interesting, but there's a specific way that the tradition of the elders is the washing of the hands, in particular for purification. It isn't just throwing your hands under a faucet and throwing some soap on there and doing this kind of thing and then walking out. That's not what's being described here. There was this elaborate system of stuff that you had to do in order to be qualified, from their perspective, to eat bread. Otherwise, you were doing it wrong, which was the accusation. Now, this washing hands thing, it seems odd to us because, again, let's just, especially in our day, you got these electronic things down in the bathrooms and stuff. You stick your hand in and the thing sort of spits in your hand, you know what I'm talking about? And then, you wipe your hands. You don't even have to use water if you don't with some of them. Some of you do. It's just all of this elaborate stuff. But the idea of washing the hands here, again, is very systematic. Now, I know that many of you know that when I was in the Army, when I served in the United States military, we talked about this on Wednesday night, as a matter of fact, that my job, I was a combat medic, but my job was to work in surgery. I was what we called an OR tech. I was a 91 Delta. And so I was the guy that you see on TV when the doctor says scalpel, and they don't say scalpel, they say knife. It just sounds really good on TV. But anyway, and he would say scalpel. I was the dude that said, popped it into his hand. Okay, that was my job. So you're gowned up and masked up, and of course you're standing over this person that's, you get the idea. Here's the thing. When we were being trained at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas, we went days learning how to wash our hands, okay? Because we're going to have our hands inside of other human beings. Probably a good idea to have them clean, okay, before we gowned and gloved, right? And so there was this elaborate thing. And so you had to come in, and you've seen this. They do it to some degree on TV, but you come into the room there that's right as you go into the operating room suite, and there's water, and it's all done by your feet, so you don't touch anything. And you turn the water on, and then you run your hand through, and you run this hand through. You guys have seen this, right? And then you break this stuff. I won't get into all this stuff, but it's like this little brush. It's got kind of an iodine kind of stuff, povidone, whatever. And then you have to start washing. And you have to do 10 strokes on the outside of the first finger in a circular motion. And then you do 10 strokes on the back of the finger. And then you do 10 strokes on the middle. And this continues all the way through. And then once you're done with that, then you keep moving down, right, until you get away. So you're starting and you're moving away from this point. So anything that the gunge that's up here is now run down here. That's the idea. That's why they always have their hands up, like this, right? Oh, you thought it was a karate thing. But anyway, that's what they're doing. And then you through, and you through, and you don't dry in there. You come through the door, you hit the door, it's a swing open door, you walk in there, and what was called a circulator, the person that's in the operating suite who is not sterile, they run and get things if you needed to or whatever. They're there, and there's a gown that's been opened for you, and there's a towel, and you got to dry it, and then you got to dry a certain way. It's insane. So that just gives you an idea of what's being described here. Because their idea of washing hands wasn't just like a bathroom trip. It was like an OR trip, an operating room trip. And there's a specific way. And they would hold the basin of water, and they would pour it. And we don't need to get into all of it. But that's what's being described. It's not just that they just weren't throwing their hands in some water and, wiping them down. That's not. The tradition of the elders was a very specific, very systematic approach to making yourself kosher. That's the idea. Their problem is the guys that are following you, the ones that you're teaching, don't do this. Why? Because we know that this is the right way to do it. So they're challenging him once again, not with Torah, God's instruction, but with tradition. This is the big conflict that we keep seeing. Now, I know that some of us are familiar with the story. I love how Jesus answers this. Because, by the way, Jesus' answer here is very rabbinical. He's a religious leader. He's responding as a rabbi would respond to a question, not with an answer, but to a challenging question. A question that throws back on the person that has asked the question to cause them to think about what they've been saying. So he uses this method. And then he answered it. He said to them, now watch the difference. Why do you also transgress the commandment of God because of your tradition? You want to know why we're not following our traditions? Well, then explain to me why you're not following Torah because of your traditions. Ooh. You see, he just put it right back on them.
Well, what is this commandment? Commandment, mitzvah, right? We've talked about this. Bar mitzvah, it's the son of the command. And what does a command mean? It's not like we had in the military, forward march. That's not what's being described. The term mitzvah means a focus point, a sign that you're pointed at. You see, because it all has to do with instruction. And so he says, look, so here's this goal, this fixed point that God had in this, and this is what he says. And he takes them right back immediately, not to anything, but to the very law, the instructions that God delivered to Moses on Mount Sinai. Because they were always appealing to Moses, right? Well, Moses this and Moses that. So he puts it right back in their court. So that's what's being described here. This was written in the 10 instructions, the 10 commandments, the 10 high points, focal points, right? Signposts. For God commanded, saying, honor your father and your mother. That's in the 10 instructions, the 10 commandments. And he's saying, you want to talk about washing hands in a tradition? Well, let's talk Torah here. And he goes and he challenges them right back with this, and he puts this on them, honor your father and your mother. And then he adds another passage, which is not specifically in the law, but is recorded elsewhere, while still in the Torah, but it's not part of the 10, let's put it that way. He who curses his father or mother, let him be put to death. This is serious. When God was saying this, when God was telling his people Israel, preparing them to go into the land. This is very significant. Notice what he says now in verse 5, but. This is what Torah says, the 10 Commandments say, and by extension, Torah in a bigger, broader picture, that's what it says, but you say, did you see it? You say. So in other words, what he's about to quote here doesn't come from the Torah, it comes from these guys and from the elders. So the word but is telling us that what he's about to say is put them in a very precarious position, because he's saying you're in contrast or in conflict to the very law of God. But you say, this is the conflict now to the words of the Torah, honor your father and mother, and if not, you're going to be, you're to be put to death. But you say, whoever says to his father or mother, and here's what they say, this was the tradition that they took more importantly than honoring your father and mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is a gift to God. Now, what had happened in those days, and even in days before that, we're going to see Jesus is going to appeal even to the book of Isaiah here in just a minute. But what was happening was these guys got to the point to where they were in such a role, in their minds, a significant role, that they could leave mom and dad behind, and if mom and dad couldn't pay the rent or couldn't buy a meal, they were free to not help because what they were doing was a gift to God. So mom and dad, I love you, I wish the best for you, but I can't take what's required of God, which wasn't required of God, it was required of tradition. I can't give you any help because I've got to pay my tithes. Sound familiar? See, we get so wrapped around the axle on this whole tithe thing. Is it 10%? Is it more? Stop. Just stop. If you're giving it, wondering how much it is, you should probably just hold on to it. Okay? Don't put it in the plate. Don't put that check in there thinking it's enough rubber. You can still hold on to one end. Geez, what is 10% of, stop. If you're doing that, you're not doing it for the right reason, so don't do it. The whole point is, what are you doing with the tithes and offerings? You're giving back to God what he's already given to you. Is it yours to begin with? No, it's not. Never was. What you have because God has given it to you. That's what tithes and offerings are. You're offering back to God a portion of it. That's what it is. If that's not the motive, then don't give. It's just that simple. We may not know your heart, but surely God does. It's like, oh, dang, man, I've got that 20 in there. I was going to bet on that game later today. All right? We don't know where we live. But anyway, you get the idea. It's an issue of the heart, not the pocketbook or the wallet. Okay? How messed up we get on this. So this is what you do in contrast to what the law says. Whatever I might have received, whatever you might have gotten from me, you're not going to get it because it's more important that I give to God. That's what Jesus is calling them on. Then he need not honor his father or his mother. This is what they were doing. He calls them on it. I'm not making this up. He said it. This is what you guys are doing. Your tradition is you got to give to the church, you got to give to the temple, you got to do all of this stuff. And if your mom and dad are suffering for it, then, then God will help them on his own. I mean, it's just the stupidity of this is incomprehensible. But that's what's happening. So then he need not honor his father or mother. That's what you say. Notice the conclusion. Thus, you have made... Whoops, there we go. Here we go. This thing keeps jumping around on me. Well, hold on now, if I can figure out which button to push. Whoops. You want me to start over? No, please, no. Right, that's what I'd be saying. Transgress the commandment with that. There we go, there it is. Then you have made the command of God. You have made the focus point, the signpost of what God has instructed you of no effect. In other words, you have missed the whole point. And you're not showing anyone, yourself, and certainly not your parents, that God's Torah is of any significance because you just move past it whenever you feel like it, out of convenience sake. This was happening all the time, and it still happens today. Oh, those Jews, how could those guys do that? These rabbis and, these religious leaders and stuff. Have you seen the people on the TV, on your YouTube? Is there any difference? It's just ridiculous. Now, they may not be the whole mom and dad thing, but the point is they're using what's supposed to be given from a grateful heart from God's people to be used for God's ministry. These people are turning around and using it for something that's completely opposed to that. And make no mistake about it, they may not have to answer for it today, but they will answer for this. Because the priority is not in the preaching of the gospel of Jesus Christ. The priority is the profit from the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's the whole point. And that's just sad. So it's easy, once again, for us to look back and point fingers and say, oh, these rotten guys. And how many times can we say it? Well, they had their traditions. We also have our traditions. We need to come to terms with it. We do. We're sitting here on a Sunday morning. Why not Sunday afternoon? Because it's tradition, right? We're going to have a midweek study. Well, what makes Wednesday midweek? Can we do it on a Thursday morning at 10? That not sort of midweek as well? Well, yeah, but what we've always done. Exactly. We have our traditions. Exactly. So let's make sure that we understand what's being described here. But this is a specific deal, and this was a specific question to Jesus concerning this stuff. And as usual, when Jesus is teaching here, it's so that these guys will learn. He's not doing this to condemn them. He's trying to wake them up. That's why. There's so much, and to this day, anytime I get these things, you guys have seen these and stuff, and look, there are issues out there with some of these big, huge places where we get all these songs that we sing, Elevation Worship and Hillsong and Bethel and blah, blah, blah. And listen, the ministries behind those things are questionable in some cases at best. So the question arises, well, then how can you sing their songs? Well, because it's their songs, not their doctrine. That's why. You see? But you can go online and find, and there are guys on there who are doing completely opposite of what the Scripture teaches. Why you shouldn't sing any Hillsong and Elevation songs. They're always telling us, always condemning. And I want to write in why you shouldn't be on here telling us this, because Jesus said if they're not for us, if they're not with us, you know what I'm talking about. We don't have to be lined up. I get all riled up over stuff like this. How dare you? How dare you question this? If the song is questionable, then obviously not. But is there anything in the songs that isn't questionable? Most people don't know they're singing an elevation worship song, as if it really matters. Now, there's some issues with these, let's be honest. But that's not the point. So which is worse, to sing a song like this, or to be the guy on YouTube saying, you're in danger of judgment if you sing these songs? You ask me which one is the one that's in the worst role. Those are the people that are in the bad role. Because they're doing exactly what the Pharisees of Jesus' day. How come you guys are singing this song? Our tradition says you can't sing that song because their doctrine isn't quite like ours. Right? Oh. You see, it's easy to look at 2,000 years ago and say, here's the problem. And wow, we're so much better now. We're not better at all. So that's what's going on here. Notice what Jesus says here. He's so gentle. Right? Oh, gentle Jesus. Now, hypocrites. What is a hypocrite? It literally means somebody who's acting, who's playing a role that is not reality. Who is he talking to? The Jerusalem big guns. Hypocrites. You guys sit in the seat of judgment and you come here and you question me on tradition while you ignore Torah? You're the hypocrite. You're the one that's acting like something that you're not. Right? This is what I personally think about Hollywood celebrities who think that they can give us their political positions. You're an actor. Okay? Or a musician. You sing songs. So what qualifies you to tell us what we can and can't do or believe? What qualifies you for this? But everybody, it's the celebrities. Oh, these celebrities are lining up with this political party. Oh, those celebrities are lining up. Really? Does anyone care? No, I could care less. These people are the very definition of the word hypocrites. What do? They play other people's lives. They're on TV, they're on movies, they're playing someone else. Why? Because as a person, they're not that interesting any more than the rest of us. They're just not. And yet there's people that hang on every word. It's sad. It is sad that these are the people that supposedly we're supposed to listen to. Hypocrites, Jesus says. Well, did Isaiah prophesy about you? Isaiah wrote 700 years before Jesus made that statement. Oh, and Jesus is equating those guys with the very ones Isaiah was nailing to the wall 700 years before, because that's what was happening in Isaiah's day as well. You see, there's nothing new under the sun, right? Everything continues as it was. But he's saying that Isaiah's prophecy was certainly for the people of Isaiah's day. But you better listen to it today, because he's talking about you. Bam. Well, here's the prophecy. This is Isaiah chapter 29, by the way. These people draw near to me with their mouth, right? And honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Notice that heart has entered the picture, because that's where we're headed here in just a minute. You see, how many times can I say this? We've got to get to the point where we are not interested in hearing about someone else's faith. Because there's a lot of people out there who love to tell you about their faith. Oh, I go to every study. I don't miss any prayers. You know, I take notes from Rick. He's really hard to follow because he talks really fast and says really dumb things that I can't figure out. Right? I've heard all of this. Yeah, exactly. But that's what's going on here. And it all looks really good. And the minute you walk out that door, you're no different than anybody that's still in the homes that never came to church in the morning. There's no difference. Because my people, these people, they honor me with their lips. But their heart is far away. Talk is cheap, man. We need to pay heed to this. Because I'm telling you, I fit right in this. I'd like to say that I didn't, then I'd be guilty of lying on top of everything else. And I don't want to do that. So no, man, it's an issue of the heart. And in vain they worship me. They're making it sound as if I'm what is significant in their lives, that I'm what their passion is. But there's nothing that they do that would reveal anything about that. They worship me, or in vain they worship me. It's just an act. It doesn't mean anything. See? And then you teach as doctrines the commandments, not of God, but of man. You see, when we start listening to these guys, and even if you listen to me, as I've told you 1,000 times in the past, you're nuts if you don't take what I'm saying and check it out with God's word. You're crazier than I am. I'm a lunatic, right? Trust me, okay? Because I'm teaching this stuff doesn't mean I'm really great at it. It's just what God has called me to do, to teach. And it kills me when I'm reading this stuff and I'm sitting at my desk and I'm just going, Lord, holy cow. Well, does this disqualify me from teaching? Because this is exactly what I do. And it doesn't stop there. He's going to go on. But you get the idea. You see, there wouldn't have been a problem if they hadn't been pointing out the failures in others. It's sort of the speck log thing in the eye. Remember that? It's always easy to see a problem in someone else and either fail to see it or disregard seeing it in our own lives. That's the problem. That's what's happening here. So he's getting on these guys because they're pointing fingers at everyone. Your disciples aren't following what they should be following. See, there's the problem, right? And then he called the multitude to himself. So obviously there's people, a lot, which is why these guys showed up to begin with. There's a lot of people around him, and now he calls the multitude to himself. Now he's talking to these guys and challenging them on what they've said and challenging their tradition in contrast to Torah. And it's as if he sort of turns his back on them and he brings the larger crowd in. And this is what he said. And when he called the multitude to himself, he said to them, hear and understand. Okay? Don't just hear. Understand. Take it to heart. It's not what goes into the mouth of a man that defiles, but what comes out of the mouth. This defiles the man. You see, their whole thing was food, was cleanliness, was kosher, was, all of this stuff. Jesus is saying that is not, nor has it ever been, the problem. You see, this can't be correct for anybody. All over the world, there are people out there who are eating and don't have any access to any way to cleanse their hands to eat. Are they all in violation of, they're not in violation, I should say, of Torah, but they would be in violation of this. What about the rabbi that's out there ministering in an area like this? I told you before, it comes down to this whole thing with this rabbinical Judaism, this rabbi thing, that even the way they put their shoes on. You put, I may have this back, don't quote me on this, but it's something to the effect of you put the right shoe on first, but you don't tie it. And then you put the left shoe on, and then you return and tie the right shoe, and then you turn the left shoe. This is literally what they're doing. And this was put out. Well, then they had a rabbi who was ministering in a village where people didn't wear shoes. Well, what do you want me to do there? Oh, well, you'll have to start a new tradition there that this obviously doesn't apply. Do you see? It's all malleable. It's all bendable. You can manipulate it, shape it any way you want. That's the problem with tradition and making tradition a standard. Because who's to say that someone else's tradition is wrong? Or wrong in comparison to yours, at least. You see, this is the problem. Look, it's not what goes into the mouth that defiles a man. It's what comes out of the mouth. This defiles a man. So he's speaking this. Now, this next statement is really interesting because, again, his attention has clearly turned from the religious to the crowd. Now, notice what the apostles say. Then his disciples came and said to him, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard you this saying? Poor Pharisees. Oh. Their feelings were really hurt, Jesus. Couldn't you have said it a little softer? Couldn't have been a little more gracious, maybe a little more kind? No! That's the problem. Nobody has confronted these people with reality. So the apostles are worried that he might have hurt their feelings. And the reason why is because they've interpreted what he said, is where I'm going to go here with this, as being offensive. And it's the same in our day, right? You guys know, as I teach up here, oftentimes, and I know it doesn't happen very often, but I get wound up. I'm usually in control. When that happens, and we'll just leave it at this, stinking slips out, okay? And whenever that comes out, I get this like look from this little blonde that sits over. It's like, don't say stinking. Why? Why? Well, because it's just, and I'm not, this is how it always happens. I can't tell you the times that people will listen to me teach and they go, man, I've never heard anybody say that from the pulpit. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. But so you see, there's all of this stuff, and it comes down to tradition. What Jesus has just said was offensive. And to many people today would be offensive. Watch. But he answered and he said to them, listen, every plant which my Father has not planted will be uprooted. These guys think they're grounded in God? They're going to be uprooted. Notice what it says in verse 14. Let them alone. Let them think whatever they're going to think. Why? They're blind leaders. They're blind that still think they're in a position to lead. How can you possibly lead if you can't see where you're going? Right? They are blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind leads the blind, then both fall into the ditch. Then Peter answered and said to him, explain this parable to us. That's a total Rick, huh? That's what that is. I don't really get that, Lord. I'm not really clear on what you're saying. To which Jesus says, are you without understanding? Really? You don't get this? You see, the reason is the simplicity of what Jesus had just said, which the apostles didn't get and offended the religious leaders. Well, what was it? Do you not understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated? Oh, that's what that meant. Now let me tell you what he really said. Do you not understand that what enters the mouth goes into the stomach, tradition alert, and ends up in the crapper? That's literally what he said. The Hebrew word as well as the Greek word both mean toilet or latrine. What part do you not understand, Peter? What goes into the mouth ends up in the dumpster. Notice I cleaned that up. Come on, give me credit where credit is due. You see, that's what he's saying. It's not difficult to understand. But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, the central part of the person, where the soul is a part of that. With your mind, your thought process, your will, your choosing, and your emotions, your feelings. This is where what's revealed, the real inner man, this is where you'll know what's going on inside there. It doesn't matter what's left in the latrine. It's a latrine. Now, you know what's really interesting about this? If you look in Deuteronomy chapter, I think it's 23, roughly 12, verses 12, God is speaking to the people of Israel, and he's speaking to a huge group of people. There's millions of people there. And God literally says, you don't read it in your English, because tradition wouldn't allow us to say it the right way. And God says, when I come into your camp, I want you to have dug holes to do your business in, because I'm walking around in there, and if I see that, in other words, step in any of it, I'm not coming back. Oh, God would never say that. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. You see, this is the point. This is all of the stuff that we missed. Do you know why? Because our traditions won't allow it. You can't say that from the pulpit, Rick. What's wrong with you? According to who? Well, according to, I don't know, right? You don't mean according to our traditions, do you? You see? Now, that doesn't mean you get to get up here and, and do like I sadly do sometimes and just run away with it. You got to try to lose a little control for the sake of just being, respecting people. That's just common sense. But the point is, the scripture is very clear about that. When Paul says, I consider everything except the cross of Christ to be dung. Oh, that sounds great. Oh, that's dung. You ever wonder what dung is? It's a pile of poo-doo, folks. That's what it is. That's what Paul said. Paul! Well, that would never be allowed in any of our seminaries. We got to say dung. Farthest we'll go is manure. That ain't what he said. So this is what has offended these guys. Oh, you hurt their feelings. Now, you know what? That's too bad. Because they're not understanding, and apparently you don't get it either. See, it's out of the heart, what's inside the person, which precedes evil thoughts and murders and adulteries and fornications and thefts, false witness and blasphemies. Where do all of these things originate? In the body? No. They originate from within, in the heart. Based on our choices, based on our perspective on things, our mind, our knowledge of things, and what it makes us feel like, our emotions, mind, will, and emotions, the soul. See, this is what he's saying. You guys are completely missing the point. You think it's about eating with dirty hands, which is going to end up in the toilet. It's not about that. It's about the toilet in the heart that's spewing this stuff. These are the things, Jesus said, which defile a man. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man. Now you can just see the religious here just going, but, oh, we got to go back and, we're going to have to watch that video again because I could have swore that Rabbi so-and-so, right? Sound familiar? Oh, I could have swore what my favorite teacher said was, yeah, you know what? There's our problem. There's their problem. Jesus is saying the real problem is a heart issue, not a hygiene issue. Okay? That's what's being described here. And then Jesus went out from there. Now, we're going to, all of a sudden, we just got through talking about dumping into a dump site, all right? And all of a sudden now there's this woman that shows up. What the heck is Matthew doing? I mean, there's no connection. Yes, there is. It's all connected. Notice, then Jesus went out from there. He's been up around Capernaum on the northwest side of the Sea of Galilee, if you look at a map. And he leaves there now. And notice where he's going. He's going from there and departed to the region of Tyre and Sidon. That's how we actually say it, but we call it Tyre and Sidon. Those are two cities of a place that they knew as Phoenicia, the Phoenicians. We know it as Lebanon. That's where it is. That's where he went. So having just had this conflict with the religious and the difference in tradition and Torah and the cleanliness of the hands versus the cleanliness of the heart, notice where he goes. Into a Gentile region, a non-Jewish region. Do you see the connection? Jesus doesn't just talk, he does. Now he's going into an area that most Jews would not have gone except maybe on business because it's the land of the non-Jews, the Gentiles. See? He's going from their perspective, the clean to the unclean. He's just dealt with the seemingly clean because they follow the traditions. And now he's going to meet a lady who has neither. Notice what happens. And behold, a woman of Canaan came from that region and cried out to him, saying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed." But he answered her not a word. Well, that was rude. There was purpose, folks, a purpose. And his disciples came and urged him, saying the same thing that you and I would say. Get rid of her. She's driving us nuts. That's what they're saying. You know, you got to wonder if they were watching him when she said this. If he responds, then we'll embrace her, right? You see? There's a method to Jesus. There was no such thing as madness, but you get the idea. The apostles were waiting for him to answer, so they'd know how to, structure their reply. That's what they're waiting on. That's why he's to see. They're waiting. He doesn't speak to her, so we can go ahead, and that means he probably doesn't want to hear from her any more than we do. And of course, then send her away, for she cries out after us. She's driving us insane. Right? That's what's happening here. Now, back up a minute. How could they even come to that conclusion? Well, look at where she's from. She's from Canaan. Oh, they would have immediately identified this. Canaan was a place where people were not great. Goes back to all the stuff we talked about. In fact, what we now call the Holy Land, in their day, the most part of it anyways, was called Canaan. It was a place where the Canaanites were, and the Canaanites were bad, bad people. There were 7 major, not just 7, but 7 major cities that were collectively called the Canaanite cities because they were in the area of Canaan. Okay? Those are the very cities that Joshua went into the land of Canaan. You know, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Jebusites, the Ites, right? If your last name has Ite in it, this is where you're from. But this is what's being described here. These people were completely hostile to the Jews. That's the first thing. Okay? Notice, keep in mind now, there were 7. We're going to see 7 baskets here in a minute. There's 7. And the first identifies the overall region of Canaan, okay? Now, we know from Mark's gospel that she was a woman who was Syro-Phoenician. So she was a woman from Canaan who was half Syrian and half Phoenician, half Syrian today, Assyrian today, and half Lebanese. That's who's being described here. The point: she's from a hostile group of people who could care less about Torah. The unclean, dogs. Because we know the rest of the story, right? We'll talk about that in a minute. That's what's being described here. But look at what she says. This woman, who is of these groups that are completely contrary to the God of Israel, have mercy on me. She says, I can't do anything. Extend compassion and kindness to me. We're going to see in a few minutes. She knows she's not worthy of it. But she's asking anyways. And then she says, O Lord, Kurios in the Greek, but in the Hebrew, Mashiach, Messiah. Have mercy on me, Messiah, son of David. Whoa. Had any of the religious recognized this? They still couldn't figure it out. Even the apostles are still having trouble with this. This woman, who's from this hostile place with everything contrary, for whatever reason, clearly recognizes that he's the Messiah. First of all, how does she know he's Messiah? Oh, maybe she did some reading on her own. We don't know. It doesn't matter. She clearly does. Have mercy on me, Messiah, son of David. She's connecting. I understand the Messiah, and the Messiah is a descendant of the son of David. What's the mercy that she's crying out? Not for herself, but for her daughter, is severely demon-possessed. Again, we live in America. We just don't get this. If you go to Nepal, I don't have time to get into all of this again. If you go anywhere else in the world, they have no problem with this. Only in America. Only in the West, I should say. Because that just doesn't happen anymore. Really. Really. It happens, folks, and it's nasty and scary when it happens. And you don't have to wonder if where you are and what you're experiencing is an actual possession or just somebody being a whack job. Trust me. Trust me. You have the Spirit of God in you, and you come into an area where there's someone who has the spirit of darkness in them. You don't think that you're going to know that? It's like magnets. You know, you turn them, I don't know, what is it, positive, negative, whatever it is, where they don't go together. You feel this, and it's like freaky, scary, okay? It just sets you back on your heels because you're just like, oh my gosh. You know, ooh, I never really thought, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. It's bizarre. You don't ever see this in America, or if you do, it's hidden and covered up, but you do the rest of the world. So this is nothing new. My daughter, this demon has a hold of her. Where is she from? Canaan. What was in Canaan? All of the places that God had Joshua snuff out. The Girgasites, all those guys in that region. All part of this Genesis 6 thing. Again, verse 23. But he answered not a word, and his disciples came to him saying, send her away. We've already talked about this. But he answered and he said, he ignores the apostles. I like that. Sometimes Jesus just flat ignores me when I say something. He's like, okay, whatever. And he just goes on, right? I love this. But he answered and said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, does Jesus know about this woman? Of course he does. Does he know where her heart is? Yes, of course he does. The apostles, not so much. They just don't get it. He's not questioning her to find out if her faith is genuine, which a lot of the commentators say. Like, this is Jesus. You're telling me he came into a situation and he goes, I'm not really sure about this one. So I'm going to ask some probing questions. Now remember the questions put back onto the, notice what he says here. I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. You can just see the apostles going, I knew it. I love it when he says that. I love it when he's like this. We've been trying to tell him this the whole time. Is he finally starting to get it? How do I know? Because that's what we do, right? Notice, though, he makes this statement to her. He knows precisely where her heart is. They don't. And then she came and worshiped him. This word literally means she, in spite of his quote-unquote supposed harsh response, I'm not saying anything to her, and when I do, well, lady, you know that I only came for Israel, right? Let's make sure that we got a clarity on this. That's how we read it. That's not what happened. Look at her response. She came and worshiped him. She literally throws herself at his feet. Throws herself at his feet. Now, she continues to ask, Lord, help me. And you can view this a couple of different ways. I think she threw herself at his feet to worship him because she knew he was going to respond. Many commentators say, no, she did this. This was now level 2 of asking. Because it, after all, says, Lord, help me. But what if she's just like, her eyes just go wide and go, he's heard my cry. And then she falls down, she said, Lord, help. What if it happened that way? See, that's the way I think it happened. Because it would make more sense to me. But he answered it, he said, it's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Now that seems weird to you and I. And again, it seems harsh. But everybody present at that moment would have understood exactly what he was talking about. First, it is not good to take the children's bread. The children are the nation of Israel. Israel is my son, God said through Moses to Pharaoh. Right? Israel is my son. So that's who the children are. The bread is the ministry of the gospel of the kingdom. Why is that so important? Who did she just recognize him as? The Messiah, the son of David, the king. She recognized him as the king. But here's the next part. And throw it to the little dogs. Oh, right? Because in these days, Gentiles, non-Jews, were considered dogs. Okay? And to this day, still, in some instances within Judaism, But they were considered dogs. They're just scavengers. Whatever you want to throw out there. They don't care if it's clean, if it's unclean, if it's, regurgitated, whatever. They don't care. They're dogs. You treat them like a dog outside. But notice what he says to the little dogs. Oh, when you chase this down, what he's saying is pet dogs. The ones that are part of the household. Everybody there, including this woman, would have known immediately where he was headed with this. I can't do that. I can't give what I'm supposed to give to the children. And he knows, of course, that I can't give it to the dog. The kids need to eat. See, that's what's being said. It's a house pet. And she said, how do we know? Well, look at her reply. Yes, Lord, I understand. But even the pets eat the crumbs which fall from the master's table. So this is not a street dog, a mongrel. This is a dog that is a part of the family. Now, many of us in here have these little creatures running around, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's what he's doing. But to everyone else there, including the apostles, she would have been a street dog. One that you throw rocks at and you kick and you spit and you shoot with your BB gun and light their tails on fire and stuff like that. Those ones. A lot of us did. Admit it. You're in church. I know most ladies didn't, but we'll just leave it at that. we were horrible. But that's, what are you going to say? The Lord has changed me. Yeah, no kidding. Definitely, praise God. So, but she's recognized, he's putting me in the house. Do you see? It's not about the dogs. We see dogs, and that's what we think. She just recognizes that he's put her in a position to have part of what the master, the Messiah, has. She's not left out. And she said, yes, Lord, even the little pet dogs eat the crumbs which fall from the master's table. Look at Jesus' response. Then Jesus answered and said to her, O woman, great is your faith. Bam! He was confused by this lady from this hostile region and hostile pagan, religion observance stuff. No. This was for those guys, the apostles, and everybody else, and it was for us today. Because, we just can't, we don't want to invite the street people in. I mean, come on, we know we'll put them over the other side over there because they stink. Right? They smell like, hangover from like 5 days ago. Right? We don't want anybody, who's got any of these serious problems. We don't want them sitting in church. We would have to ask them to stand outside. Are we any different? You don't think this happens today? Would it happen here? That's the heartbreaking part of it. Would it? I hope not. Well, they're boisterous, and some people, they just can't keep their mouth shut, and they're loud, and they talk, and they interrupt, and that's just so irritating, right? Do we see a connection here? Because you see, that kind of thing, according to our tradition, the pastor should go minister to them. Right? Send one of the elders. Right? We don't want them in church. Going to get dirty stuff up, and they came in here eating, they spilled food all over the floor. Well, you see, we could go, you get the idea. What is wrong with us? Is that person not more important than whatever it is that we're seeing in them? Isn't it about their heart? Didn't we just say it's about the heart and not the hygiene? But there's still issues with that. And we live in a day where things are different. Rick, no, we don't. No, we don't. It's been this way throughout history. People with bad intentions come into church, scope the sound system or whatever, thinking they can. Yeah, okay. But how do you know when they're coming in scoping that out that the Lord isn't going to challenge their heart? You see? So we have to be careful when we do this. Now, this is really interesting because we move from the religious to this woman to Jesus' explanation, and we're going to close with all of this. And I know there's a lot, it looks like a lot, but it's not. This is the area now as that Jesus is leaving. He's going back over here. He's now over there. You can see Tyre and Sidon up there by the Mediterranean Sea. See that? That's today modern Lebanon. And now we're going to see that he's coming down, and he's going to go back across the Sea of Galilee there, and he's going into that area of those 10 colored places there. That's the 10 cities on the eastern side of the Jordan. And because there was 10, they were called the Decapolis. Okay? Now, we've already seen one of these in chapter 8, where Jesus went across. This was with the storm, where he spoke to the wind and the waves because he was on his way here. This is where the Gadarene demoniac, we call him, came out of the tombs and challenged him when he landed on the shore there. Okay? Now, more to that story in just a minute, but that's where Jesus is. Now, he's going back across, and he's coming somewhere in there between Hippos and Gadara, which we get Gadarenes from, and this is the area now we find him in, okay? And when he got into the boat, this is Mark's account of that first encounter. And he's gone across, he's gone into the Decapolis, to Gadara, and this demoniac has come out. We know the story. Jesus has healed him. There's many demons in me. This is where the Legion story comes from. Jesus sets him free. Now, when we studied this passage, I shared with you, and it's not changed for me in 40 years of ministry, this was one of the most heartbreaking passages to me. Because I totally get what this guy is wanting to do. Look at this. This is now after he's healed. So when he, that is of course Jesus, got into the boat, he who had been possessed begged him that he might be with him. There's the heartbreak. This guy wanted to be next to Jesus. He didn't want to be separated from him in any way, shape, or form. I know what he's just set me free from. I don't want to leave his side. He begged him that he might be with him. However, Jesus did not permit him. Oh, that Jesus. Sometimes I wonder about this guy, right? But look why. No, but said to him, go home to your friends and tell them what great things the Lord has done for you. You're going to be with me. But in the meantime, I've got a job for you. I've got a ministry for you to do. And here's what's required. You go and you tell everybody that you know in your whole area, the Decapolis, what God has done and how he has had compassion on you. Now watch. And he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. Why is that significant? Well, because Jesus has just crossed over, and he's now in the multitude, and guess where they are? In Decapolis. And he's been teaching and sharing with them. And verses somehow, they're coming to him. I jumped a slide here somehow. But they were coming to him in droves. They were coming to him to be healed, to hear and all this stuff. And we read that Jesus healed them all. Who are these people? They're the result of the demoniac's ministry. That's why Jesus said, you can't go with me right now. Go tell. The very people he told, those are the people now gathered on the shore on that side as a direct result of this guy's ministry. He's been teaching, he's been healing. Now Jesus called his disciples to himself, and he said, I have compassion on the multitude because they have now continued with me 3 days, and they have nothing to eat, and I do not want to send them away hungry lest they faint on the way. In other words, they were a really remote place. Then his disciples said to him, where could we get enough bread in the wilderness to fill such a great multitude? What? What? If you're like me, it's like, what is wrong with these guys? Didn't we just see this? Yeah. Don't they learn? No. They don't. You know why? Because they're like you and me. And we see this incredible thing God does, not just in our lives, but the 5,000 others, and besides women and children that he touches, and it's all ooh, and stuff like that. And then now we got this, this nagging Canaanite woman in our ear and stuff. And, it's like, Lord, we're tired. We want to go home. And Jesus says, hey, no, let's just get them some food. Do Did they forget? Yes, they forgot, just like you and I forget what God has done. If we didn't, we'd do like the guy at Gadarene and we'd be telling all our friends about it. But we don't. So no, they didn't get it any more than you did. Well, where could we get enough bread in the wilderness to fill on such a great multitude? Can't you just see Jesus going, what? Really? That's what I would have said. I love this. Again, he doesn't challenge him. Jesus said to them, well, okay, here we go again, boys. You think you're going to get it this time? Sure we are. Yeah, we're going to get it. No, you're not. Jesus said, I couldn't do the yes and turn my head thing. It's really challenging. Anyway, Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? And they said, 7 and a few little fish. So he commanded the multitude to sit on the ground. We've all heard this before. And he took the 7 loaves of fish and he gave thanks and he broke them and he gave them to the disciples. And the disciples, again, Jesus supplies, gives it to those closest to him that he's teaching. Their responsibility is to give it to the others. Anything changed? No. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 7 large baskets full of the fragments that were left. Completely different group, completely different region, completely different everything. It's not the same, no matter what some of the commentators tell you. It's a different setting. And even the baskets, in the first time with the 12, when they took up the 12 on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, there were 12 baskets left over with fish. The word there describes like a little lunch bag type of size. This is those honking ones that you see, they're real soft. They would carry laundry in them sometimes, but that's what's being described here. So completely different. Why is that significant? They took up 7 large baskets full of the fragments that were left. Where are they? They're in the land of Canaan. What were the land? We noted the 10 Decapolis now, but there were 7 significant Canaanite cities. One, by the way, was the Girgashites, where the demoniac guy was from. And now we've read about the Canaanite woman. So here he is, and now the 7 baskets are that he's now going to provide for the cities that have always been hostile and contrary to the people of God. And make no mistake about it, we are not told so, but if you don't think that Syrophoenician woman and her daughter were right next to his side when all this took place, you're nuts. I can guarantee you they were. That's where you and I would be, seeing all of this. Now, those who ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children. That's a lot of folks. In the last verse, and then he sent away the multitude. And he got in the boat, and now he's going to cross again back into the region of Magdala, where one lady named Mary Magdalene, this is where she is from. This is where he's crossing back over. What's the point of all of this? Jesus is contrary to most things that you and I understand. Doesn't matter whether it's tradition. It doesn't matter whether it's in relationship. It doesn't matter in just compassion for other people, regardless of who they were. He's in an area that is completely hostile to who he is and the message that he's bringing, and yet he's blessing them beyond comprehension. Do you know why? Because that's what he said he would do when he gave the covenant to Abraham, that through the Israelites, through the Jews, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. You see, he's fulfilling his word. We have to be careful with our own traditions and set them aside. We have to get to the point to where people are our priority, regardless of how they may rub us the wrong way. Isn't it interesting that most people that we come across in our lives are what we call sandpaper? You ever notice that? They just rub you the wrong way. They're the toughest ones to get along with. But they're everywhere to be found. Okay? That's why people don't sit on the front rows, because Rick is a sandpaper guy. No, I don't. Anyway, that's what we have to do. We have to get behind this. We always say we want to be like Jesus. So my question is, do you? Do you? Are you willing to stay behind instead of getting in the boat with him to go? Are you willing to come to him knowing of the ridicule that you're going to get? You're not just a Gentile from these hostile Gentiles. You're a woman. What are you thinking? Right? That's the lessons for us in 15. Tradition, Torah, all of these things that we keep talking about. And Jesus is so far above them. God, help us to be the people that he wants us to be. Because if you're like me, I do not possess the ability. I just don't. I want to, but it's not there to get a hold of. And I say all the time, he hears me, and I'm like, Lord, what the crud is wrong with me? Why do I do these things? And I get so aggravated with myself that stinking keeps slipping out. Because I know that my stinking life, instead of worshiping God, is in the crapper. Oh, yeah. And it bugs me. And it's just like, Lord, I don't want to stand up there and teach people when you know that these are issues that I have. And he's like, did I ask your opinion on the matter? Well, no. Well, then go do what I asked you to do. See? I'm not interested in your ability. Could care less. I've asked you to do something. If you love me, do it. In spite of yourself. He called these 12 guys who clearly aren't getting it. Okay? They're just goofballs, just like you and I. But the Lord Jesus is so different, and that's why we have to tell people about him. We don't need to tell people at Calvary Chapel, except that this is where we try to learn to be like Jesus. Other than that, no. We need to talk about Jesus. That's what it's all about. If that isn't, just like what we were saying with the tithes earlier, if that's not why we're coming, then there's no reason to come. Stay and watch the game. That's what I'd do if I wasn't up here. I'm just kidding. You see, that's the point. All right? The ministry of Jesus, especially as Matthew is portraying him, is so stunningly amazing. And that's what I hope you're picking up as we move through this gospel. That it's more than just a Sunday sermon. Because what Matthew is telling us and what Jesus is showing us is a lifestyle that has a heart for the God who created us. And it's motivated by a love that we all know and understand very well we do not deserve. All of us. Okay? Amen? All right, stand. Get Tom up here. Remember, we're going to close in worship. And as he comes up, I'm going to beat feet towards the back. We're going to close in a short song. Whoops, I just turned my mic off. And that way I can get back there and say hi-bye. Okay? All right, God bless you guys.